Well, it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce my friend of long standing, Duane Carpenter, who has been deeply into the esoteric field for as long as I've known him, and that's been almost 30 years, it seems. Duane has this unusual combination of a very deep esoteric study and practice along with an exquisite artistic ability. So, and a deep interest in the Deva evolution, sound and color, and in making the whole matter of Devic contact very practical. So I won't take any more time. I'll just say we're very happy to have him coming all the way from Florida, or from whatever point in the cosmos you did come from, and, and to join us and to present his lecture this morning, which Venus and the Devas. Thank you, Duane.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I would like to take a minute to thank all of you for all the different geographical areas you've come from to visit with us and to share your many insights and wisdom. I would like to thank Michael, Olivia, and all of the USR affiliates for the wonderful, selfless work that they continue to do every year. And not simply here in the States, but in many important geographical areas. Now, this presentation is going to be on Venus, but it's going to be a slight variation of maybe what you've read on the roster. When I make presentations, I am very influenced by the people who make presentations before me. I don't have a set of standard lines that I can repeat habitually. I try to organically make it up as I go along. I have certain ideas, but there are certain key points that have been brought forth, and I try to tie them together, kind of weave all these insights into what I believe are what the Tibetan calls organic wholes or organic fusion. Now, to set the theme for this, we have a very short video by Justin, which is on sound. And sound is very important because it's going to parallel everything that I say about color and geometry. So it will set the theme, and it's not a completed video, it's very short, and it needs some dubbing over, some additional work. And the name of it is, Justin? The Solar Word. So, with that, if you'd please disconnect any electronic devices. We're taxiing down the runway and we're about to take off.
Om, said the Almighty One. Thus all came into manifestation. In the beginning was the Word, the intelligent goal of the complete all-consciousness that encompasses the whole creation process until the end of time. The basis of all manifested phenomena is the enunciated sound, or the word spoken with power, that is, with the full purpose of the will behind it. Herein, as is known, lies the value of meditation. For meditation produces eventually that inner dynamic purpose and recollection, or that internal ideation which must invariably precede the uttering of any creative sound. When it is said that the Logos produced the worlds through meditation, it means that within his own center of consciousness there was a period wherein he brought it over and meditated upon the purpose and plans he had in view, wherein he visualized to himself the entire world process as a perfected whole, seeing the end from the beginning and being aware of the detail of the consummated sphere. Then, when his meditation was concluded, and the whole completed as a picture before his inner vision, he brought into use a certain word of power, which had been committed to him by the one about whom naught may be said, the logos of the cosmic scheme, of which our system is but a part. It must be remembered that the sound Aum is man's endeavor to reproduce on an infinitely small scale the cosmic triple sound whereby creation was made possible. The words of power of all degrees have a triple sequence. First, they are sounded forth by some fully self-conscious entity, and this invariably takes place after a period of deliberation or meditation wherein the purpose is visualized. Second, they affect the Deva kingdom, which produce the creation of all forms. The Devas fall under two categories, and their effect is dual in character. The Devas on the evolutionary path, the great builders of the solar system, and those under them who have passed the human stage respond to the sound of the word, and with conscious realization collaborate with the one who has breathed it forth, and thus the work of creation is carried out. The Devas on the involutionary arc, the lesser builders, or elementals, who have not passed through the human stage, also respond to the sound, but unconsciously, or pre-force, and through the power of the initiated vibrations, build the required forms out of their own substance. Third, they act as a stabilizing factor, and as long as the force of the sound persists, the forms cohere. When the Logos, for instance, finishes the sound of the sacred Aum, and the vibration ceases, then disintegration of the form will ensue. So with the planetary Logos, and thus on down the scale. The words of power, or the permutations of the Aum, exist in every possible tone, subtone, and quarter tone, and upon these shades of sound, the work of creation and its substantiation is built up. A multiplicity of sounds exists within each greater sound and affects different groups. It must also be remembered that generally and broadly speaking, the sounds within the solar system fall into two groups. The initiatory sounds, or those which produce manifestation or phenomenon of any kind on all planes. Eventuating sounds, or those which are produced from within the forms themselves during the evolutionary process, and which are the aggregate of the tones of every form in any particular kingdom of nature. Every form likewise has a tone, which is created by the minute sounds produced by the atoms composing that particular form. So, as stated before, sound is the instrument of creation. It is the very means by which the divine thought can be transmitted and impressed upon the whole field of space, with the intention of expanding the consciousness it creates within itself.
Thank you, Justin. We've had some wonderful work in astrology and the rays. And there's two subsidiary sciences of esoteric astrology that I'd like to briefly touch upon. That's the science of the centers and its relationship to Laya Yoga, and the science of triangles. Now, if Justin, you could pull up this same identical chart. Okay, that's fine. Just leave that one. That's all right. This is fine. I can work with this. Yes, that's the one right there. I'm not sure everyone in the back can actually see all of the different facets, so this might be helpful. And we'll see if this can coordinate, because I'll be really making reference to this, but you'll, in the back, will be looking up there. In cosmic fire, there's these immense outlines around how Fohat, in its unmanifested state, creates the different rays and planes. And what we have duplicated here in this chart is all of the triangles that need to be mastered and linked between the first and the fifth initiation. Because this is a science, there are certain principles and laws that we have to follow. And those principles and laws are infallible and will lead to similar results, whether you live here or on the other side of the coast or you live in another country. The laws and the principles are the same. And what you see here with these 5 triangles, basically, in the first 5 initiations, is a master outline of the road that has to be trodden. All the Devic lives that we will meet, and all the angelic kingdoms that we will have to interface with to make progress to the next level. Now, let me just regress slightly. For reasons that are very hard to understand, the one ray, the one monadic life, descends down through these different levels to serve, to manifest, to create certain dynamics. It is said that the monad, before it brings in the solar angel, creates it or borrows it from Venus, it makes a sound. It listens to that sound attentively within itself, and it notes what it is lacking. The divine ego is thereby created on the note that the monad lacks. The solar angel, in turn, enunciates a note, and it listens attentively within itself to see what is lacking. And that soul ray is determined by the monad, and then the soul, in turn, determines the personality ray by sounding its note, listening attentively, and then sending down these streams of light, these threads, in creating the personality ray. Personality ray sounds its note. It listens attentively to what's lacking, and from that observation, it creates the 3 lower personality rays. Okay, that's the great out-breath, the great descent in the different levels. And I appreciate your patience, because I'm really generalizing with an immense amount of material. The path of return is directly determined by how the threefold personality working in these lower triangles can integrate itself, become a light-bearing unit of fire that can now be useful to the ego, because the ego created it. It created the threads, sent them down, they integrate, and then they're drawn back up, and this is the first, second, and third initiations, and the solar angel now broods within itself with this new quality. Now, the gaze of the divine ego is no longer down, but it can turn its gaze towards the full beauty and majesty of the one monadic life. When the monad overshadows the soul and absorbs it, and the solar angel causal body is disintegrated and it goes off back to its original system, you have a direct connection between the personality and the monadic ray. All that transpires between this first and fifth initiation is controlled by one or other of the rays as they interface with the planes and relate to a group or subgroup of Devic lives. Initiation is the entry into lighted substance, and within that light is additional light. They unfold very much like a flower, one out of the other. Let us just take a few of these triangles and briefly show how that works. Now, we know at the first initiation, you have stimulation of the heart. It's a second ray solar system. But technically, what has to be mastered to undergo the first initiation is a triangle has to be created between the base of the spine, the sacral center, and the throat. The Devas descend into the pool of the sacral, and they lift up those prisoners of the planet into their higher vibrations, their higher vibration in light. It's a descent and it's a lifting, and that's why we're going to get into the vortex shortly here to show how organically that actually works and how they're all connected in a very unified way. The only disconnect is in the lower subplanes of the mental, but in the Deva evolution, they work with great unison and facility. Okay, this is like the divine ecosystem. For these elementals down here ultimately to be redeemed and to be lifted up here, there has to be a sacrifice. Temporarily, the higher Devic force comes down, repolarizes itself, and then lifts it. Now, the sacral center is negative, the sacral center is positive to the throat, which is negative before the first initiation, meaning that the majority of the energy is focused in that center, which is not just sexuality, but it's a number of factors that we've studied and we understand. Interestingly, you go from the first initiation over to the second initiation, and Eleanor brought out some very important information about the rays and how complex it is to balance them, and it's not always what appears. The difficulty of undergoing an initiation is that you are forcing yourself into the periphery of a life of which you know very little. That's why it's not just kick back and go with the flow. It's march forward and develop your will. The only way that you can successfully, safely work with the Devas is by developing the point of inherent will that exists within each center, because then you are insulated. You control, you manipulate them, and they do not overpower you. If you have not developed the will, it's better to stay away with too much advanced work with the Devas. So this is the divine ecosystem. One drops down, one lifts up, and then it repolarizes. This becomes negative and this becomes positive. The attention is on the lower mind. And then as I'm going to show as we go through the different mental centers, there's always this constant shifting. The discomfort comes, the so-called burning ground, and there's several definitions. The most esoteric is that when these two groups of devas meet, there is a period of integration and discomfort as they rearrange their magnetic polarity, their sound constituency, and their atomic geometry. There's like many, many things happening here at the same time. So the discomfort is because you're not able to receive that Devic force in its full impact until you have purified the lower vehicles. As the Tibetan says, the door to initiation is electrical. When you can vibrate the three lower vehicles sufficiently to a high enough level, you will slip effortlessly through the door of initiation. Like attracts like, and it's all based on levels of magnetism and electricity of which science is only beginning to discover in their work with quantum physics, string theory, and a number of other areas. Second initiation. So you're not only dealing with a new group of Devic lives, but when you switch from the first initiation to the second, you're dealing with a group of devas that are on a completely different line of development. The reason why this is spread out, and all these triangles are taken from the Tibetan's works, page 170, Treatise and Cosmic Fire, is so that you can see these are the masculine initiations, these are the feminine initiations, dealing with new Devic life and on a different ray line. But each initiation makes the next one easier because each triangle is nested within the next triangle. They are not spread out quite like this. So there's an organicness to working with the devas in the triangles, in the energies. And all astrology is the science of cycles and relationships. It will be seen in the student's chart what potential exists for that lifetime. And one of the single most important things that you can learn is to know what is the light that you must work with in the initiation you are undergoing, because you will develop a meditation that will be scientifically accurate. I know there's many unknown factors here. And Michael's wonderful work with ray analysis and astrology is a tremendous movement forward. But in time, we are going to understand the rays by the revelation of light that takes place within our centers. That is the seal. That is the substantial point that tells you conclusively where you are in the path. If you know you're working on a certain triangle, you know the next triangle that's coming up. Keeping in mind that as the first initiation is undergone, the second triangle is already stimulated. When you undergo the second initiation, the lower mental triangle has already been stimulated considerably. They are not as sequential as we think. It happens simultaneously. Any questions up to this point?
Excuse me, Duane, is it possible for you to use the big chart up there because we can't see this? You can, you have a photo or something?
Okay, we'll do it with the magic wand. Okay. Robert Burrell made a wonderful presentation here, and in that was a statement by the Tibetan that during Atlantean times, Laya yoga was developed to a very high degree, but it was misused. And the reason why it was misused is because the students, the disciples in their lower ranks, decided to take the substance in these centers and use it for their own personal purposes. And that's why the Tibetan says Laya yoga is an older yoga and we have gone beyond it. Yet, when you read further in Cosmic Fire, he says, but a new Laya yoga, the yoga of the fiery centers, will come back on a higher turn of the spiral as we move into Aquarius, And the difference will be the student and the disciple will have to study their centers, but always with the idea that as these powers come forth, they are solely for the group. And that is what distinguishes the old Laya Yoga from the new Laya Yoga. You have to understand the context in which the Tibetan makes these statements. There is a law or a science that the Tibetan calls the law of correspondence or analogy. Now there is a slight difference between those two, but basically what he is saying is that the lesser, the micro, is reflected through the macro. If you want to understand any of these higher solar deities that reside in the higher head center, any one of the 7 rays, the 12-petaled egoic lotus, you have to approach it through the unique ray makeup you were given. It's not just going to pop out one day. You have to build through all these different triangles to get up to that point. The law of correspondence is infallible if followed as an occult science. And there are many pitfalls and there are many disclaimers that the Tibetan makes. And when you understand that color and sound are very complex, this is an oversimplification. Every ray or plane has 7 subrays or 7 subplanes. So what does that mean? If I say you have a second ray soul, does that automatically mean that you're going to come in on that indigo blue or the light blue vibrancy of that ray? Or does it mean you might come in the early stages of integration on one of the subrays? Therefore, the second ray blue will dominate eventually, but it may be tinged or colored by not only the fact that there's 7 subrays, but all your other rays. It's a giant, magnificent mosaic. And it appears immensely confusing if you simply read it out of a textbook. But if you see it in graphic images, a lot of it comes to life. A lot of minutiae fit together into systems and organic wholes. Any questions up to this point? Are you yawning, miss, or is that a question? Okay. The vacuum, the vortex, the sphere, and the vacuum. It's very easy to understand a vacuum if you look at weather systems. Hot and wet, cold and dry. They come from different directions, and when they meet, each attempts to cancel the other out, but it cannot because of their diversity. So what they do is they turn upon each other. They do a dance. All the chakras and all of the different sub-chakras are 2 types of Devic force under the direction of the will that meet temporarily in some place for some purpose. And when the planes and the rays meet, they turn upon themselves. So you have to imagine all of these wheels spinning at high speed. Each one has a different velocity, relates to a certain number. Each one has a light-bearing capacity, a certain hue that needs to be understood. And each one has an emanating sound. But it is a spherical rotating life. Okay, we know in a weather system, when these 2 types of force come together, it creates rotary motion. The faster the rotary motion travels, suddenly you get suction. And this is why in a tornado, it will cut a swath right down and it will just absolutely suck everything right up. It defies gravity because when 2 types of force that are incompatible meet, they create tremendous power. And even though this can be a little intimidating at first, later on it becomes your Jacob's ladder, your salvation, to be able to work with that vortex. Because vortex number 1. These three first initiation that I outlined earlier, each one of these is a vortex. But when the life of these three Devic groups circulate between the 3 points of the triangle, the faster and the faster that they travel around those 3 points of the triangle, they create the vortex. This is so important because there's a disconnect in so much discipleship training between, I love triangles, I work with them all the time. But how do triangles really work with energy? Triangles, in some respects, do not exist as we have been outlined in our books. That is a fifth ray foundation, which is very, very important. But when you realize a triangle eventually makes a vortex, now we're not looking at something simple. We're looking at something organic. And out of the throat of the vortex, remember the vortex is these conical streams or bands of Devic life. They rotate. It's like you put your blender on in the morning with a banana and this and that, and you hit it, and all these different things that were separate, now, before they're fully homogeneous, you can see they're like bands. If you draw a straight line between three of those bands on different levels, you create a triangle. But does the triangle really exist? Not as you approach the higher levels. It goes into pure organic streams of rotating life. Every triangle, I said, comes out of the next triangle. Every vortex comes out of the next vortex. When you create a vortex, you create a pull. How do the Devas from this reach up to here? You create a vortex, you create a vacuum from the vortex. And nature, according to the Tibetan, and we've read this in our science books, abhors a vacuum. What rushes in? The next higher group of Devic lives who are responding to our invocation. It is a law that if you invoke scientifically, occultly, the Devas will come to your aid because their whole existence is to serve. They're not hiding out in the mountains, as William and Harold eloquently outlined. They're everywhere. We're in a sea of Devic energy. What isn't the Devas? It's that little point of phohotic will, point of abstraction, singularity. And that is what sets all the Devas in motion. And when they have fulfilled the law, their cycles, Phohot pulls the plug and the in-breath pulls them all back to itself. So keep in mind this is rather abstract, but it is a major tool to the initiatory experience. Create the vortex, it's really a dual vortex, create a vacuum, pull down, and redeem those prisoners of the planet. And it's a very interesting ecosystem because when these Devic lives here are drawn up to here, and then from here up to here, or on the feminine side from here to here to here to here, these group of Devas cannot go to their next level until another group of Devas come in behind them to fill the void that they create. There is this ever continuity of expanding vortices or alignments with the rays, because every ray relates to a vortex, that is going on all the time. Feeling a little giddy, feeling a little high from this conference and all these wonderful people in high energy. Why is that? Because we have created or moved into the group Antakarana. And that Antakarana is the sum total of all of our development. And it is right now, as you are sitting in your seat, stimulating the triangles in the vortices that you need to get to the next level of initiation. It's here, it's now, and this is what is meant by the interdependence that we all have on each other. We are not perfected. We contribute our individual Antakarana and energy to the group life? Yes, question. 10 minutes. Okay. Let's just take a few models here quickly. Could you put that little rotating? That was the one that I got from Hot Math. Was that wonderful lady here? Oh, there you are. Thank you. I looked for the artist, the contributor. It was on Hot Math about 2 or 3 years ago, and I pulled it off. And this is this. This right here in this little corner is a description from Cosmic Fire, as I mentioned, of the first 3 to 5 initiations. It's a 5th rate presentation. Very valuable, very important. This is more of a 4th rate presentation, but it still has its limitations. It's more of the lower 4th rate, and I don't necessarily mean the conflict side. This, if you can enlarge that a little bit, I'd appreciate it. This is more like all of these dynamics going on at the same time on the inner planes. This is what the Tibetan means by moving towards simplicity. Not a premature simplicity where I've seen the light and I don't have to study and I need not meditate because I had a blast of energy. No, every blast of energy is the result of study, direction, will. But it always leads to greater organic wholes. And this is a prototype of Babbitt's ultimate atom that we've all seen in Cosmic Fire. It's also known as the divine Anu, and what you will notice is that it's spherical, it's a dual vortex. Energy rushes in at the top, and it spirals and circulates as it goes down, and when it gets to the bottom, it circulates back up. If you can imagine 7 of these in your mind's eye, you have arrived as far as the premier visualization, because even though the spheres become more sophisticated because we're transmutating the 7 into the 4, well, I should say the lower 4 into the higher 3, and then the 3 into the 1. These spherical lives become more ethereal and they become less complex. And that's why when you finally reach the apex, which is Fohat or the will, there's just 1 and then there's nothing. So take a minute and study that. There's a beautiful comment the Tibetan makes in Cosmic Fire where he says if you want to develop the will, you have to do several things. One is you have to master with the eye the amazing sequence of events that you are about to undergo. This is a roadmap. These are not just pretty pictures. This is a roadmap of exactly where each and every one of us are going to go. Maybe your rays are slightly different and they'll shift and change, but it is a standardized tool that will be used more and more as people work with the Devas, as they become more integrated and they can do it selflessly and with safety. If you can imagine this rotating image, see how it's breaking up right now into like little bits and pieces? Imagine that your monad is on one of those bands. If we were to look at this on like a more of a really high level, not just an individual chakra in the human system, not just a solar deity, but on a monadic level, that in that monad is only a cell in a greater being, and that being is outbreathing and inbreathing. And if you want to know the speed at which you are going to travel through your journey or incarnation, you study the rays, because the rays are cycling at different speeds. There is a velocity to love. There is a color. This is a prototype developed by Arthur Young, I think. He was a scientist for Bell Laboratories. And if you can imagine, this is Fohat, the abstract point through the axis right here. And These are the 7 rays. And as I rotate these, notice how the rays come out. They're not sequential. And this is why we do study the importance of this is going to happen, and then that's going to happen, and then something else is going to happen. To go back to William Meter, who made a great observation, we got to get beyond this thing about one ray is higher than another ray, because it's spherical. And yes, maybe initially we have to say, okay, this is good, but this is really better, and this is best of all, rather than this is good and bad. Good and bad is an old paradigm. So as the rays rotate, this is how astrology works. If you can imagine a number of wheels within wheels within wheels, they're all rotating and dancing to a rhythm set by the will of the logos or the solar logos or the cosmic logos before incarnation came about. And if you were to look at the 5th ray, which is the orange patch that is rotating out, I'm going to pass this around, starting with you, Michael, and just roll it. You will see that I have marked on that orange part 7 and then 7 in another direction. It's not just like you're on one ray. You are in a ray and maybe a sub-ray of that ray. So this shows how the ashrams are collectively pooled together. They have their own individual autonomy, but at the same time, they all make up a much greater organism that is bigger, brighter, and more luminous than just one by itself. Yeah, just pass that around. Okay, let's see. Let's see if we can move just into the rays and the planes. That's number 2. Okay. We got one last visual image, and then we'll tie it all together. It's an animation. And what it does, okay, it's called number 2, the rays in the planes vortex, and it's in dynamic symbols number 1. Now, what this image does, as he's looking for it, it shows, I can walk through this, and as we're, you boot it up and I'll continue talking. What this is a flash image of the rays that are coming in one direction and the planes that are coming from another. And just like the vortex that we talked about, the tornado, what happens when those two energies meet? They rotate. If you look very carefully, if we can pull this image up. No, I apologize. Since we're limited with time, we're going to skip that image and we're going to end with this. I have like 2 minutes, Michael? Right. Okay, perfect. This is an image of the Venusian school. Trident of fire with 5 green emeralds. If you position those emeralds equal distance apart, you'd have a perfect 5-pointed star. The trident is a symbol of triple force and the upper triad. It pierces the lower 7, and if you were to look at that closer, you'll see those lower 7 are Devic groups who move out, and it dominates them and it brings forth that triple fire. If you look at the trident, it has blue flame symbolizing the 2nd ray, and it has orange-red symbolizing the 5th ray, and some yellow, higher aspect of the 5th. So every symbol is inherently full of so much meaning if it can be analyzed and then put into a meditation. Okay, now, this is another symbol of the 5th ray. But what we have done here, and we're going to close the presentation with like a little mini alignment. I am going to animate this. This is a symbol, again, of the solar lords. And they once again, okay, hit flash. We're not going to do it for too long because very, very powerful. But I want you to see what an image is when it becomes animated. If one picture is worth 1,000 words, then one animation is worth 1,000 pictures. And you're going to see it right here as soon as you pull it up.
Unfortunately, the flash can't go through the VGA projector.
Okay, that's all right.
Maybe by this afternoon in your workshop.
Yeah, in the workshop, maybe we'll work out any little difficulties. Okay, go to my website. There's probably 1,200 images, very similar to this. 10 years worth of work. And it's right there for you to use, download for free. Okay, well, I am not going to ask if there's any questions because we're going to wrap it up, but I just want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to share a few crumbs of the great ageless wisdom that comes from an exquisite banquet.
All right.